My name's Adam Fronczek. I'm part of the Next Church strategy team, and I'm a pastor here in Cincinnati. I am so excited about the two Cincinnati leaders I get to introduce now. Reverend Damon Lynch III is a force for good and a force to be reckoned with in this city. If you are a politician, a business leader, a nonprofit leader, or a pastor in this city, you had better be ready for Damon to challenge you on whether your work is really encouraging justice. The pastor of New Prospect Baptist Church in Roselawn for the past 28 years, he began his ministry in Over the Rhine, where the economic justice was profound, even though there was a high concentration of nonprofit services. He brings personal experience to the question of what really creates economic justice and opportunity for people living on the margins. Damon has been a great mentor and friend in ministry to me. I know a lot of people in this room have been in a cohort group at some point. You know what a cohort group is? A group of peers who get together. You bring your best plans for your work, and the group helps you sharpen your work around the edges and improve your thinking a bit. A couple of years ago, I was in a cohort group with Damon. I shared my plan. Others around the circle offered some feedback that I don't remember. And then Damon leaned into the circle with a prophetic stare and said, "Okay, Adam, let's talk about what you really want to do." That challenge has had a deep and abiding importance for my ministry. Damon, I am grateful for you. Rabbi Miriam Terlinchamp is perhaps the most dynamic young leader in the city of Cincinnati. I wonder how many of you have been part of a pastoral search committee or have negotiated with one. Here's how Miriam became the rabbi of Temple Shalom. At the end of the interview process, the committee enthusiastically invited her to come and lead their congregation. They said, "We would love for you to come and be our rabbi," to which she replied, "I will come if you agree to sell your building." I can't drop this mic. The story is important because it ushered Temple Shalom into a period of creativity, asking who they were going to be in relationship to their community. The new life that has come has been amazing. Miriam is a lead organizer in our community and a founder of Just Love, a dynamic interfaith worshiping community. Every time I run into her, I am energized in my own ministry by the creative movement of God's Spirit in hers. Miriam, I am grateful for you. Damon and Miriam work closely together as clergy leaders and friends, and I am excited that they are here to challenge us today. Please welcome the Reverend Damon Lynch III and Rabbi Miriam Terlinchamp.
Good morning. So Miriam's going to wait until I get done. So it's an honor for me to be here with you today. So Adam, how far did you go away? How much time do we have collectively, Miriam and I? 30 minutes, okay. So I'm going to speak fast because I'm a Baptist pastor and 30 minutes is not enough time, especially since I'm sharing those 30 minutes. My affinity for the Presbyterian Church in the city of Cincinnati goes back to a man by the name of Maurice McCracken. And Maurice McCracken was one of our great civil rights leaders and fighters for social justice in our city. Maurice McCracken would do long fasts for justice. He was arrested on many occasions, and while sitting in the jail, which is not far from here, he would not eat, and he continued to stand for justice. And so I want to call his name out today as we gather. The other was a gentleman by the name of Clarence Wallace, and Clarence pastored the Carmel Presbyterian Church in a predominantly African-American community. He too has passed away, so I wanted to remember him. And then I remember the Mount Auburn Presbyterian Church, which was a leader in the fight for gay and lesbian rights in this city. So those three things remind me of the work that the Presbyterian Church has been active in the city of Cincinnati. Adam, I thank you for the friendship, and I welcome all of you to our city. So let me quickly get into why I'm standing here today. In the Hebrew book of Genesis, 15th chapter, it states that know for certain that for 400 years, your people will be strangers in a land not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated there. And after 400 years, I will come and deliver them. I will punish the nation that enslaved them and bring them out with great promises. Many of you know that it is usually chronicled that the African American community, or the first slaves, were brought here in 1619. We are now in 2020. We're 401 years since the first 20 Africans were brought here to the shores of America. As you chronicle those 400 years, the first 244 were just fighting to be free, 1619 to 1863. The next 101 years were just fighting for equality, 1863 to 1964. For 101 years, we had to deal with segregation after slavery. And then the next 50 to 55 years after that, we had to deal with redlining, mass incarceration, inferior education. So it has not been a walk in the woods. It has not been a picnic for the African American community for the last 400 years. But if we believe in what I call dual fulfillment of prophecy, what God did before, we believe he can do again. Which leads us to your Joshua passage, and this has always been my struggle. I come from a family of preachers, and I always wanted to be the Moses. I always wanted to be the deliverer of my people. And then I came to Joshua chapter 1, verse 2, and it clearly states, Moses, my servant, is dead. And that just jumped out at me. There was no euphemism. Moses has passed on. Moses has transitioned. Moses is dead. And I had to accept that reality, that the deliverer is gone. Martin is dead. Medgar is dead. Malcolm is dead. Fannie Lou Hamer, dead. Sojourner, dead. All of our deliverers are dead. And we honor them. But now we move into the time of the Joshuas. And in that first chapter of Joshua, 4 times God says the same thing to him. Therefore, be strong and courageous. So we are now in the period where we have to move from seeking and looking for deliverers, looking for the next Moses, the next Martin King, the next Medgar, and look for those who are going to move us to possess the promises that God has for us. One of the things that we do here strongly in the city of Cincinnati is how do we build wealth in the African American community? How do we possess the promises that God has for us? The understanding is, and you all know the statistics and the numbers, Forbes magazine says by the year 2053, net worth for African Americans in this country will be 0. Net worth will be 0. So we're not moving in the right direction. We know that the average net worth of a white person in America is 10 times that of an African American. So we have to figure out how do we build wealth in the African American community. Wealth is something you can pass on to your children and your grandchildren. So I challenge people in the African American community here in the city of Cincinnati to look at the smaller minorities in our country who are building wealth, to look at the Patel Motel cartel and know that the Indian community owns 63% of motels in this country. And if you add hotels, it's 37%. To look at how the Vietnamese now control manicures and pedicures in this country. And that happened in 1975 after the Vietnam War ended and Cambodian refugees came to this country. They met a woman by the name of Tippi Hedren. Anybody remember her? Anybody old enough? in the movie The Birds. She was the woman in the movie The Birds. And she taught them and showed them how to do manicures and pedicures, and now they control an $8 billion industry. That if you travel through the city of Cincinnati and almost any other city in our country, stop in a gas station, 9 times out of 10 it is owned by somebody of American, Arab, or Indian descent. That if you park anywhere here in the city of Cincinnati, especially here downtown, the person taking your money will be of Ethiopian descent, because they control parking. That if you buy black hair care products almost anywhere in this country, it'll be somebody of Korean descent who will sell you black hair care products. And so they own and control what are called nonlinear economic niches. And a nonlinear economic niche means they control an economic sector that is nowhere near tied to their history, heritage, or culture. And so these smaller minorities are in America, and they control an economic sector which allows them to send their kids to college without student loan debt. And after 400 years, the African American community has been here, and we were hard pressed to figure out what economic sector do we control. And that's after 400 years. And so we challenge ourselves to build economic sectors that allow us to build wealth for our children and our grandchildren. You could say that we control black churches, but they're dying. Black churches are dying. Not only black churches, the church is dying. If you travel through the city of Cincinnati, there are large churches that used to be full of people, and now they're half full, if that. Every time a president gives a State of the Union address, you will hear him or her say, no matter what's going on in the country, the state of our union is strong. It's hard to say that now about the body of Christ. So there becomes a challenge. And I think Adam wants me to talk about this. I pastored for 23 years, as he said, in a community called Over the Rhine, which is about a stone's throw from where you now sit. You cross a double yellow line, you leave downtown Cincinnati with all of its Fortune 500 businesses, and you were in Over the Rhine, where there was just tremendous poverty. But not only was there tremendous poverty, in Over the Rhine, there was every social service agency known to humankind. You name it, Over the Rhine had it. From Tender Mercies, Drop-In Center, City Gospel Mission, food pantries, everybody was in Over the Rhine. Now understand, we were considered one of the worst communities in the state of Ohio, highest poverty rate, and yet we were the most serviced community in the state of Ohio. So clearly, servicing people does not make them whole. It was just a visual, hard lesson, especially for us as do-gooders, church people who love to do good. So Over the Rhine was the community where suburban churches would all get in a van on a Saturday and say, let's go to Over the Rhine, and come down and paint a wall or pick up trash and then eat some pizza and go back to the suburbs. And yet, we were the most serviced, but still the poorest. Over the Rhine now, I don't know if you've been there since you've been here, because normally when people come to our city, it's like, let's go to Over the Rhine. Now it's sushi bars, microbreweries, and people are walking around. It's a lot safer than it was, and it's a total transformation. But guess who's no longer there? The indigenous residents and the social service providers. All social service providers had to leave. It was like everybody out of the pool. So now what is considered a vibrant neighborhood, one now that the New York Post writes about, a great transformation, it is no longer a service community. We need to learn that lesson, especially as churches. We cannot service people to make them whole. So what we do, I had a meeting yesterday. Now, the mayor of our city announced about a couple weeks ago that he's thinking about a run for governor. So an email went out, and this is my last story. An email went out to 48 clergy, predominantly African-American clergy in our city, from the mayor's communications person. Now, the mistake that he made is when he sent the email, he gave access to all 48 people that he sent it to. So instead of him sending it to himself and then blind copying everybody else, so we wouldn't know who all got the email, it came to all of us, and we all know who got the email. The email says the mayor wants to start reconvening his quarterly meetings with clergy. And these were predominantly African-American clergy. So I sent an email to all 48 and said, we will not meet with the mayor until we have an agenda to present to the mayor. Unless we have an agenda to present to the mayor, there's no need to meet with the mayor to hear whatever it is the mayor has to say. Because we understand at this time of the year, everybody is courting the black vote. That's all you hear about now, the black vote. As if we really matter. Every 4 years, we matter. It's the black vote. In between those 4 years, there's nothing that happens. But part of that is because as a black community, we don't put the agenda in front of those who are now courting our vote. So I had a meeting yesterday with the clergy who showed up from the list of 48, and we put an agenda together for the meeting with the mayor to say these are the things that we think are important. And one of the powerful things that came out of that is that we will be asking for a 0.7% increase in the earnings tax, which would generate about $123 million a year to bring to the African-American community that lacks affordable housing, that it lacks public safety, that lacks the ability to build and grow entrepreneurship. So we're finally trying to do things, because what we want to do is put something on the table that makes them go, whoa, they're serious. They really thought this through. Because what happens in our city, and probably yours as well, and this happens in our city government and in our private institutions, they have something called community and economic development. So there's an office in our city called Community and Economic Development. This is the last thing I want you to hear as I leave you with. What we're saying is you have to remove the and. The problem with community and economic development is that when it's community, that's what we get, which means we get more services. And we already know that servicing people does not work. Now, I'm not against it. It creates a nice safety net. If you're hungry, we will feed you. If you're naked, we will clothe you. That's a safety net, but it doesn't build wealth. You have to remove the and. So it has to become community economic development, not community and economic development, because the economic development is what happens with developers who are normally white, who get to build stadiums in black communities, who get to build hotels, who get to build industry, and we are left out of that because we're stuck in the community side. And we allow ourselves to be stuck in the community side. And we're saying no more. Moses is dead. It's now time for the Joshuas to lead us across the river, and Miriam's going to talk about that, so we can possess the promises. And we do that unashamedly. Miriam is my friend. She's one of the greatest rabbis we have in this city. I grew up in a black Jewish community. And a few months ago, some Jewish friends came to me, and they said, Damon, do you know why we built Jewish Hospital? And I didn't, and although I grew up in the neighborhood in which it was, they said, we built Jewish Hospital because there was a time when Jewish doctors were not given privileges to practice in the other hospitals. So we built our own. And what I loved about it, it was on a street called Burnett Avenue. They didn't call it Burnett Avenue Hospital. It was in a community called Avondale. They didn't call it Avondale Hospital. They called it Jewish Hospital. In other words, if you don't like it, get over it. So let me say this to this predominantly white crowd. In the African-American community, we are still struggling to find our place in this country. We're still struggling to be willing to name it as it is, because we know that we're still challenged. So if we build something and call it black or the African-American this, we will get pushback. It's like, well, Damon, why do we have to have Blacktown or Africatown? Nobody challenges Chinatown, Koreatown, or any other strong ethnic group. But we still get challenged. But guess what? after 400 years, we're over it. And we're coming to possess the promises. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. What Damon did not say about his new institution and how huge it is, what is it, 60,000 square feet, something like that? Hundreds? You said 100? 90,000 square feet. That before it was the New Prospect Baptist Church, it was the Jewish Community Center. And when you go to visit his amazing church, you'll see chickens and children, and it's always alive. I remember at 10 o'clock at night, I asked you, who's locking up this place? And you're like, it doesn't get locked up. It doesn't change. But if you look over outside one of the windows, you'll see a gigantic empty pool, a swimming pool with a big emblem of the Jewish community there, just vacant and abandoned, and there are no children swimming in it yet. And I think about the legacy of our people and how we handled our own need to be included, to stand up in the face of persecution, to assert ourselves, and then also in that pursuit, what we left behind and what we abandoned and what we forgot about ourselves in that journey. I say all this as a child of a Holocaust survivor, as a Jew by birth, as a rabbi in a community, as a non-conventional looking Jew in this way, that our people have a preoccupation with sheer institutional survival. I think that's true for many faiths, but it's absolutely true for the Jewish faith. And I think that occupation or preoccupation with survival is really different than legacy. It's so difficult, for me at least, to imagine Jewish community without persecution. So much so that the mark of the covenant is no longer the brit, no longer the blood covenant, but it's truly the mark of persecution and victimization. If you can cite a story of, for me, it's when my grandfather was in Buchenwald. Maybe it's for you when you couldn't be treated because you were Jewish or you were locked out of something. If you have a story of a pogrom, then you know you're really Jewish. How do we test if you're truly ready as a convert? When were you uncomfortable? When were you slandered? When did you feel scared for your personal safety? Okay, you're a Jew now. You get it. And I think the problem of staying in that cycle, which is 5,000 years long, is that we never get out of that binary. And if we want to eschew it, we need to let go of the sense that there's a victim and an oppressor, and we're always on the side of the victim. That doesn't work for us, at least, anymore. And there's this natural solipsism of institutional faith that we can't imagine a world without our version of faith, that we've taught ourselves that legacy is always upholding what was. And I think that's really tied to the way we've been hurt. I think we talk about Joshua, we talk about Moses, but also part of that leadership cycle is Miriam, who danced and found that water. It's Rahab, who was a traitor and a prostitute and a spy and a hero, who saw the future of destruction and said, I'm out too, guys, what am I gonna get for it? That, is there a possibility to see ourselves as hospice workers for what was, for midwives for what will be, to be the shifra and the pua, to be the spy, to be the tambourine shaker, to be the destroyer and a bridge builder? In my tradition, we talk a lot about Lador Vador. You can try that, it's really fun. Lador Vador. That was beautiful. Which is from generation to generation. We've got lots of really pretty folk songs about it. And then we also have this commandment, which we say 36 times in our Torah, to imagine ourselves, bechol dor vador, in every generation, as personally redeemed from bondage. And we do this by telling the story that we've carried the Torah from burning buildings, hidden in the linings of our coats, torn into pieces and smuggled across stolen borders for the sole purpose of sharing it with the next generations. So how can we turn our backs on it when it's rooted in trauma and pain, and because that's what legacy looks like? I think that the biggest issue is that we're part of this myth, and I'm curious if this is true for the Presbyterians as well, but we've connected to this myth that we're part of an unbroken chain of tradition. when the truth is we are a part of a series of breaking and broken moments that we've connected to a chain and woven into a story that is both sacred and fallible. And once we distill that brokenness, that we're not part of this unbroken chain, then there can be a singular abiding truth, which I think is B'Tselem Elohim, that we're made in the image of God and that God is contained in each of us. And that we each are equally mandated to honor the dignity of every human being, but also that we're each equally equipped for the journey of creating the next breaking. Thanks. We think about these rivers, these bodies of waters. I think there's 3 times, you'll help me, 3 times in at least the Hebrew Bible where we're crossing a river or a large body of water onto dry land. We see it in Exodus, with Joshua, and then with Elijah. And each time there's the same word that's used, which is becherev. You can try that one's harder, becherev. It's the cha, becherev. So it's typically thought of as dry land, that the miracle, the first time we get through the miracle on dry land, we rejoice. The second time, we're like, let's move on and take Jericho. Like, we forget sort of this miracle that happened. And each time in the passing, we're trying to say, see, Joshua is like Moses. He did the same kind of things, but we can move past it now. And then Elijah does his thing. In that charav, that dry land, if we're just going to have a little exegetical journey, can also be translated as desolation. It can be translated as trauma or pain or waste. That the way that we walk through the river is on our desolation, is on our trauma, is on our persecution. And not that it's above us or separate from us, but in every journey there's a walking through. And that's the ba, walking in. It's always a confusing translation that they walked on dry land because the ba means in it. You're in it if you're walking through a river. And that cycles of change have pain and desolation, and in-itness is part of the journey. I think about my own story in my congregation, that if anyone would have told me that a piece of your spirit and soul would be left on the table in pursuit of what's next, I don't know if I would have done it. That first it was sell your building, that was obvious. We had 7 acres and 30,000 square feet, and we had a roof that was, it was so cracked there was raccoons coming in, and I had named them, and there was like a deep relationship in the brokenness of this building, and the only way to fix it was on the backs of the people who needed it more, and it just seemed so obvious. And I wasn't that nice about it, as Adam so eloquently shared, and it was easy to get behind it, but if we had just had sold the building because it was expensive or because we wanted to be somewhere modern and it was cheaper to sell it out of fear, then that wouldn't have been the right thing to do. To sell for the sake of selling is nothingness. But to sell and use the capital on that legacy to invest it in a vision, well, that's something. The problem is the vision keeps changing. Each river keeps changing. Each part of the winding eternity keeps changing. So for us, it was for selling the building, and the vision was for community. Okay, well, what does community look like? One that's everyone's equal. What does that mean? To release debt. Oh no, we gotta change our whole financial structure. And so the cost, we only lost 2% of our congregation when we moved our building. We did a really good job in listening. It was great listening campaigns. There was lots of cookies, lots of warm hugs. And then when it got political, we lost 22%, all from the highest donoring. So of the 30 top donors. No one's clapping now. So once we really risked, well, then we really lost. And also we gained, and we had a complete demographic switch, and all of a sudden we became young and gay, which was so fun. And our congregation grew by 30% every single year, and that's what our budget quadrupled in that same time. I know. And each time they're like, you can't release that debt, you can't do that, you can't do that. And I was like, I know, we can't, so we're going to. And in each journey, it was painful. And then at each time I'm looking out and I think, oh, finally, promised land. And you're like, oh no, it's wilderness still. And I'm coming at the ripe age of 40 years old to understanding that's all wilderness. Right now, my biggest problem is I need another building. So I'm like back in that cycle again, learning and relearning and breaking and binding and building this change. Damon talked about that strong, resolute, chazak va'amatz, chazak va'amatz. And it's strong and resolute, I think, is the traditional translation of that, right? So we say strong and courageous are those two things. And the chazak is really being bold. It's the ego. It's believing when you're coming up against those police, coming against that border, coming against that frustrating executive committee, coming against the red lines in that budget as you watch people leave because they don't believe in it. That's the boldness. That's the chazak. And sometimes you just got to meet the world with that. But the amatz is the strength or courage of heart. That's the vulnerable side. That's the part saying it's not just this ethereal large vision that's going to lose or going to risk, but I personally am going to lose a lot. Who's going to want to hire me after I did this? What kind of community will I go to? What does it mean to destroy a whole synagogue and keep risking it and risking it and risking it? What does it mean to take only some of the stones and not all of them? And I think that if you're thinking about this, if you've got a building to break or a chain to unlock, to think about what part is necessary of the chazak, what's the ego, that's the strength, the aggressiveness that I'm needed, and what's the amatz, where's the vulnerability that I'm bringing to this, the courage, because only those two things work. And so when Joshua's being told to lead, he's saying, you gotta bring both, baby. I won't tell you if you're thinking of this that it's worth it. Not the growth or the flippant demographics or even the new centering around justice. I can't tell you how many times I was crying and drinking in the shower over those years. Let's be real. I know, there's a cup holder in my shower now. So, but for real. But our inheritance is the river, is that cherav, and being in it is the obligation of the leader to use our gifts to deliver those stones on the other side as long as they'll have us. So thank you so much for sharing with me today.